Imagine waking up 5,000 years ago. There is no television, no internet, no entertainment industry. After surviving the day, after hunting or farming or building, after the sun goes down and the fire is lit, what would humans do for fun? They played games, not as a luxury, not as a pastime for the wealthy. Games were there at the very beginning, before writing, before cities, before civilization itself. And they have never left. But here's the thing about games that most people miss. Every game ever created, from a child throwing rocks at a target to a billion-dollar video game franchise, demands something from the player. A skill, a decision, a moment where you have to think, react, calculate, or bluff. Games are not just entertainment. They are tests. The oldest games tested your body. Prehistoric children chasing each other across the savannah were not just having fun. They were training. Running improved endurance. Wrestling built strength. Throwing rocks at moving targets developed aim and hand-eye coordination. Hide-and-seek taught patience and spatial awareness. There were no written rules, no winners and losers declared. But the game was real and the stakes were survival. Every skill you practiced in play was a skill you might need when the hunt came. And then came the first manufactured game. Sometime in the deep past, a human picked up a knucklebone from an animal, looked at it, and threw it. Not at anything. Just threw it and watched which side landed up. That was the first die. The rules could not be simpler. You throw it, and you accept the outcome. But the skill it demanded was one of the hardest in all of gaming. Accepting randomness. Your first instinct is to believe you can control chance. You cannot. The game teaches you humility. And the pleasure of not knowing turned out to be so deeply addictive that humans have been throwing dice for at least 5,000 years. The oldest known board game is Senet, played in Egypt around 5,100 years ago. The board had 30 squares arranged in 3 rows of 10. Players moved their pieces along an S-shaped path, and the movement was determined not by dice, but by throwing 4 sticks. Each stick had one flat side and one rounded side. How the sticks landed told you how many squares to move. Certain squares were hazards. Landing on the square of water sent you back. The square of rebirth gave you a second chance. The last 5 squares represented the underworld, and passing through them successfully meant your soul had navigated the dangers of death. Think about what Senet required from a player. You needed luck management, the ability to work with the throws you got and still make the best of a bad situation. You needed risk assessment, deciding whether to push forward aggressively or hold back and avoid traps. And you needed emotional control because when you landed on that water square and got sent back, you could not afford to lose your temper. The game was not just entertainment. It was a rehearsal for the unpredictability of life itself. Around the same time, in Mesopotamia, the royal game of Ur offered a different challenge. Played on a board of 20 squares arranged in a rectangular pattern, each player had 7 pieces. The dice were tetrahedral, 4-sided pyramids, and you threw them and counted how many points landed upward to determine your move. The goal was simple. Get all your pieces around the track and off the board before your opponent did. But the twist was that certain squares allowed you to knock your opponent's pieces back to the start. That changed everything. Now, you were not just racing, you were competing. You had to decide whether to rush your pieces forward or keep them clustered for protection. You had to assess when to attack and when to defend. It was a game of positional strategy, and Irving Finkel, the British museum curator who reconstructed the rules, discovered that the strategies players used 4,600 years ago are the same strategies used in modern race games today. Then came games of pure intellect. Around the 6th century AD, in northern India, a game appeared that changed the history of strategy forever. Chaturanga, which we now call chess, was played on an 8x8 board. Two armies faced each other. Each piece moved differently. The pawn advanced one square forward. The knight jumped in an L shape. The bishop slid diagonally. The rook moved in straight lines. The queen, which was originally a vizier, moved only one square diagonally in the earliest versions, and the king moved one square in any direction. The goal was to trap the opponent's king so that no matter where he moved, he would be captured. Chess was the first game that demanded pure abstract reasoning. There was no luck involved, no dice, no hidden information. Every move was a choice, and every choice had consequences that unfolded many turns later. To play chess well, you needed forward planning, the ability to imagine the board 3, 5, even 10 moves ahead. You needed pattern recognition, the ability to see familiar tactical formations and know instantly whether they were dangerous or promising. You needed spatial reasoning, the ability to hold a complex arrangement of pieces in your mind and visualize how it would change with each move. And you needed patience. The best chess players are not the ones who make brilliant moves. They are the ones who avoid making bad ones. Chess spread from India to Persia, and from Persia to the Islamic world, and from there to Europe. Each culture reshaped the pieces to reflect its own society. In medieval Europe, the elephant became a bishop. The chariot became a castle. The cavalry became knights. The vizier became a queen. And the queen's movement was expanded to the most powerful on the board. Chess was not just a game. It was a mirror of the world that played it. And as that world changed, the game changed with it. Around the same time, in China, a very different kind of strategic game was developing. Go was played on a 19x19 grid with simple black and white stones. The rules are absurdly simple. Players take turns placing a stone on any empty intersection. If your stone or group of stones is completely surrounded by the opponent, they are captured and removed. The player who controls the most territory at the end wins. That is it. 2 rules, but the depth is staggering. There are more possible board positions in a single game of Go than there are atoms in the observable universe. Go demands a completely different skill set from chess. Chess is tactical, based on calculation and short-term sequences. Go is strategic, based on intuition and long-term positioning. In Go, you cannot calculate every possibility. There are too many. Instead, you develop a sense of balance, knowing when to attack, when to defend, when to sacrifice a local battle to win the larger war. The game teaches you that sometimes the best move is not the one that captures the most stones, but the one that controls the most space. That is a lesson that applies far beyond the board. But not every game was about skill. Some of the oldest games in the world were about pure chance. Dice games appeared independently in nearly every civilization. The ancient Romans were obsessed. They gambled on chariot races, gladiator fights, and dice games in taverns. The Emperor Augustus himself was known to gamble. Roman soldiers gambled at the foot of the cross during the crucifixion of Jesus. The appeal is psychological. When you roll a die, your brain releases dopamine in anticipation of the result. A win feels like destiny. A loss can always be blamed on luck. The game asks nothing from you except that you keep playing, and that is what makes it dangerous. The only skill gambling requires is knowing when to stop, and that is the one skill most people never learn. In ancient Greece, the Olympic Games tested the human body to its limits. The sprint tested explosive speed. The long jump tested coordination and timing. The discus tested rotational power. The javelin tested technique. Wrestling tested strength and leverage. The pentathlon tested versatility. Each event demanded a different physical skill, and the athletes who won were not necessarily the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who had trained their specific skill to the point of mastery. The Romans turned public games into a political machine. Gladiatorial combat was not just bloodshed. It was a highly specialized craft. Different gladiator types used different weapons and armor. The secutor carried a sword and shield. The retiarius fought with a net and trident. The Thraix used a curved dagger. Each matchup tested different combinations of speed, strength, technique, and courage. The crowd watched not just to see someone die, but to see skill, to see a well-timed dodge, a clever feint, a perfectly executed counter. The same reasons people watch boxing or mixed martial arts today. In medieval Europe, ordinary people played games that tested different skills. Dice games tested luck and self-control. Card games, which arrived from China via the Silk Road, tested memory and bluffing. In a game like early poker, you had to remember which cards had been played, calculate the probability of what your opponent held, and control your face so your expression did not betray you. Backgammon, called tables at the time, tested probabilistic thinking and strategic positioning. These were not simple pastimes. They were exercises in decision-making under uncertainty. The 19th century brought organized sports with standardized rules. Baseball tested hand-eye coordination, sprinting speed, and split-second decision-making. Football tested teamwork, spatial awareness, and endurance. Boxing tested timing, reflexes, and the ability to endure pain. These games did not invent new physical skills. They formalized and specialized skills that had been tested in informal play for thousands of years. Then came video games. In 1958, William Higginbotham created Tennis for Two. Running on an oscilloscope, the game was simple: turn a knob to control the angle, press a button to hit the ball. It tested hand-eye coordination and timing. In 1972, Atari released Pong. Same basic idea, but now in arcades. Players competed not just against the machine, but against each other, reading each other's movements, predicting where the ball would go, feinting and countering. Arcade games of the 1980s added new demands. Pac-Man tested pattern memorization and route planning. Space Invaders tested reaction speed and resource management. When do you shoot? When do you dodge? When do you sacrifice a life to protect a stronger position? Fighting games like Street Fighter tested execution speed, combo memorization, and the ability to read an opponent's intentions through their movements. Strategy games like Civilization tested long-term planning and resource allocation. First-person shooters tested spatial awareness, reflexes, and map knowledge. Online gaming added something entirely new. Now you were playing against humans who could think, adapt, and deceive in real time. Multiplayer games tested communication, coordination, and trust. A team that could not communicate could not win, no matter how skilled each individual player was. The social skills that games had always taught in local groups, reading body language, negotiating, cooperating, were now being tested across continents. Mobile gaming changed the equation again. Games like Angry Birds tested trajectory physics and problem solving. Candy Crush tested pattern matching and memory. These games required smaller time commitments, but they still demanded specific cognitive skills. The medium changed. The test did not. So here is the full picture. Prehistoric children wrestling to build strength. Ancient Egyptians throwing sticks and managing risk. Persian scholars calculating chess, moves 10 turns ahead. Chinese masters feeling the flow of a Go match. Roman crowds watching a gladiator time a dodge perfectly. Medieval peasants bluffing across a card table. Arcade players memorizing patterns. And a billion people right now making decisions, reacting, planning, and competing in games that have changed in form, but not in function. Every game, from the simplest to the most complex, asks the same fundamental question: what are you capable of? Some games test your body. Some test your mind. Some test your ability to handle luck. Some test your ability to read other people. but every single one reveals something about how you think, decide, and react under pressure. Games are not just entertainment. They are one of the oldest ways humans have ever found to ask each other a simple question. What can you do? And as long as there are humans, we will keep asking it